Not much shock absorption with those stock friction dampers. It's just basically a shock body with a metal spring. There's really not much to it. I wanted some oil-filled shock absorbers or dampers. So after some research, I settled on the CVA Super Mini shock damper kit from Tamiya. And there's the part number right there. And I'm going to get these stock units off. I'll get these built and I'll be back. I saved the bag that the hop up part came in, and I put, like in this particular instance, I'll take the dampers that I just took off and all the screws, and I'll pop them in this bag, and I'll mark it. I'll know what they are just by looking at it, but there's all the goodies. Some instructions. Go through the assembly. It's not difficult at all. It just takes some time. I'll get all these parts out and I'll build one. So here's the shock body. When you can see how short, stubby that shock body is. Get that. There's the bottom. And then there's the top. It's real simple. You just got 4 sets of those. Here's the hardware. And just like before, one of my other videos, I always take and put all the parts in a glass dish or something that'll keep everything all in one spot. But so there's shock shafts. The shock shafts, and then here's the ball studs that the shock will, instead of screws, the top and bottom of the shock will snap onto those. And then we've got our oil. There's our shock springs, and they're marked. Got a yellow mark on them. Here's our oil. We're not going to mess around with oil, different weights. Coming out of the gate, I'm just going to use the oil that was supplied. And then I believe these are all the same. It's 4 of the same. So here's some spacers. Here's the shock, the bottom of the shock that the spring sits on. That'll slide on the bottom of the shock shaft, and then the spring sits on top of that. I believe the proper name for that is the spring perch. So here's the shock, the pistons, and you can pick different 1 hole, 2 hole, 3 holes, and that dictates the stiffness, how easily the piston can ride up and down in the oil. So different pistons and different oil weights is how you tune the shock absorber. And then this goes on the shock shaft, and then that snaps onto your ball stud. And then this little package here, so here's all the parts laid out, all the springs, everything I showed you before. The piston that they called out for in the instructions was the number 8. It's got a single hole in it. It called for the larger spacer, but That's just why we're assembling these. I'll follow the directions, but I'm sure I'll be changing those. I'm sure I'll be changing pistons and playing around with oil and all kinds of stuff. So let me clear this out of the way a little bit. I'll get the components we need to build one shock. All right, guys, so I've got all the parts out to build one of these shocks. I've got the body, upper cap, lower cap, spring perch. These are some spacers, and here's the piston. Once again, they want us to use the piston with the one hole in it. I don't know if you can see that or not. One hole, and we got the ball studs, E-clips, O-rings. So let's get going with this. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to take one of these E-clips and we're going to put it right in one of those little notches right there. This is a little tricky the first time you do it. Don't get frustrated. Once it's seated all the way, you should be able to take and spin the clip around the top of the shaft. All right, so now that we've got that on there, we're going to take the piston, and you can see that. See that little burr on the top of the piston right there? That's from where I cut it off the tree. I'm going to just take a little piece of sandpaper and just clean that up until I can't feel that anymore on there. So we're going to take the piston and slide it onto the top of the shaft here. Just like that. We're going to take another E-clip and we're going to secure to the piston to the top of the shock shaft with that E-clip. So again, just set it on there just like that. And then you want to come at it with your needle nose. Some people have a different way of doing it. I use the needle nose. There we go. So it's nice and seated on there now. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to take these two O-rings, get a little oil on those. You don't need a lot. And then just take the other O-ring and just kind of rub the two together. You want to just get a coating of oil on them. And we're going to stick them right into the bottom of the shock body, that little recess right there. We'll put in one. We'll put in two. Take the shaft that we just put the piston on, the shock shaft, slide that into the top of the shock body and right out through those O-rings on the bottom. So we're going to just kind of hold those O-rings in place and pull that shaft out. You can put a little oil on the shaft before you slide it into the shock body, but I oiled up those O-rings pretty good, so it should be fine. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to take that bottom cap. Slide that on the shock shaft. Make sure we don't cross thread. And they'll thread on super smooth. You'll know immediately if you don't have the threads lined up, if you're cross threaded. So just all it takes, you don't have to use pliers or anything like that. Just squeeze the body and squeeze this and just give it a little oomph. You can work the shaft up and down a little bit. And then what we're going to do is we're going to take this piece on the bottom. And what I did was I took a piece of painter's mask that I had and I just doubled it up over itself. I folded it back and forth on itself a couple times. And so I'm going to use this to go around the shock shaft. Just like that. Okay. Just like that. And you want it above the threads. And we're going to use that to protect the shock shaft from the needle nose pliers. And I have a tool somewhere for working on shocks, and it grabs the shock shaft without any risk of damaging it. But again, I'm moving and everything's packed up. So then we're going to take the bottom piece and just thread that on. It threads on very easily until you get it up in just about the end. And you can feel it get tighter, and you don't need to horse it. Just get it till it bottoms out and snug it up a little bit, and that's it. Okay, so then we're going to take the oil, fill it with some oil, fill it with So I like building the shocks. I like a kit that has the oil-filled shocks, and I just like building, so the more I have to do, the better. So we're gonna fill it right up to the top there. Might even go a little bit more. You know what? I'll hold on a second. So what we're gonna do is you're gonna hold the shock body, and then we're gonna take the shock shaft, and we're just gonna up and down. And we want to work all the air bubbles out of it. There'll be air bubbles under that piston that was down at the bottom of the body, and we're just gonna see those air bubbles. I just actually incorporated those air bubbles by lifting the thing all the way up to the top, sucking air in off the top of the. But we're just gonna keep working that up and down, up and down. And usually what I do is I take a box like this. I have a rack for building shocks, but I took this piece of cardboard and I just cut some X's in it with my hobby knife. And what I want to do is just slide the shock down into that hole. So you guys can see that. I want to just slide the shock body down into that hole, and then I'll spin it around. You guys can see the shock sticking out the bottom there. You see that wiggling? What I'm going to do is just pull the shock body down into that cutout. And basically I just looking for a way to hold it perfectly vertical while those air bubbles settle out of there. And now that I've got that sitting in there, I'm gonna add just a couple more drops. I want the oil right up to the top. And you know it's full when the oil looks like it has just a little bit of a dome to it. You don't, the oil won't look concave. It'll just have a little bit of a dome to it. Because what's going to happen is you want, that should be about good. You want enough oil there so that when you drop this bladder, when you drop that cap on, it goes with the round side. Let's see if I can hold that right. It's going to go on like this. Okay. And what that's going to do is it'll push some of the oil out, and that assures that no air gets captured in the shock body. So we're going to let that sit for a few minutes. We'll come back and I'll put it together, and but I'm going to give it a chance to let some of those air bubbles dissipate. Okay guys, we're back. I let the air bubbles dissipate. I let them dissipate for about 20-25 minutes. So now we're going to take the oil seal, set that on the top. But you know what I like to do, and they'll show this in the instructions with the oil kit. Some of you, I'm sure, that have built Tamiya kits or other kits that have shocks, you've already been down this road, but we're going to wrap it in some paper towel, and I had dampened that paper towel with a little bit of isopropyl rubbing alcohol, just 70%, and that helps clean up the oil off the side of the shock. So we're just going to drop the oil seal on there, and it's natural to see some oil bleed out. And then we're going to take the cap and set that on there, and the same thing, you get that lined up just nice, it's going to thread on perfectly. If there's any tension or resistance, you're cross-threaded, stop, pull the cap back, and try it again. Okay, so I'm holding the shock body. I'm just going to grab the top of the cap and give it just snug it up just like that. You don't have to go crazy. And then you see I've got oil on the shock body, so I'll use this has the alcohol on it. Clean up my hands a little bit, and get a little bit more of that alcohol. Dampen another fresh piece of paper towel. I always have alcohol on my workbench. I use it on my airplanes. I guess I really got it on my workbench now. I use it on my airplanes and for thinning epoxy, 30-minute epoxy, and when I want to brush on some epoxy somewhere, isopropyl alcohol will thin out the epoxy, and it's also great for cleaning up epoxy. Helps clean up epoxy while it's still before it cures. So all right, so we got that shock body, got the oil in there, we've got everything assembled. So now we're going to take our spring perch, that's this piece here, that goes on just like that, and then we're going to take our spring where did we put our spring? It rolled away on me. And I put the mark, these are marked yellow, and that's the firmness of the spring. I always put those up towards the top of the shock. I gotta take my spring perch back off. I should have put the spring on there first. So spring on, and now the spring perch. And then I'm gonna pull the spring, hold the spring back a little bit. And I'm gonna put the larger spacer, and if I did the backs, I used the larger spacer and then the medium spacer. So we're gonna put the medium spacer in there. And shocks are all about tuning. Oil weights, the piston that you choose, the spacers, the spring tension. There's a whole, some people slam them together and just leave it. And some people really get into adjusting and tuning the shocks. And it's just like a real race car. I mean, you've got to figure out what you have to do to get the handling just right for each specific track, so it can get involved. All right, so now we have the two ball studs, upper and lower, and it shows in the instructions attaching the rear dampers. We're gonna go in the upper outer hole, and then down here in the upper hole on the bottom. All right, so we'll get those in, and I just use a little cross wrench for that. The cross wrench works just fine for this. So just drop the ball stud in there, and we're gonna go in the upper on the bottom. And just, again, just get it started. Then you can pull the wrench away and see if the stud is bottomed out or not. And that one's got a little way to go. So you should feel it bottomed out. All right, so that's bottomed out, and I'll just give it another little turn. And then the top ball stud goes in the upper or outer hole. So I'll thread this one into there. And again, you don't want to horse these. You'll strip the plastic out. So I can see I've got a little ways to go there. I will tell you a secret. Not a secret, but something you can do. If you do over tighten these and you strip the plastic, which isn't hard to do, you can take a little thin CA, cyanoacrylate, or it's like tire glue, the thin stuff, and then just before you put the screw or whatever it is back in the hole that you stripped out, put just a drop. Like I put a little bit on the table, and just a drop. Put a couple drops on a piece of cardboard, and then pick it up with a pin or something like that, and put it on the threads that are going into the part that's stripped out. You don't want it soaking wet or dripping. You just want it wet with the glue. That's it. And then thread it in. And then you'll see when you have to take it out, it's not impossible. You'll turn your wrench and you hear a snap, and it'll crack loose and back right out. But it works great, and it's not permanent. And just don't use a whole ton of glue. All right, so we got both of those ball studs in. We've got the lower and the upper, so all we have to do now is put the shock on and see if I can snap this in place. Here's the upper. Here's the lower. All right. And that is all the shocks. I did the other three. So all the shocks are mounted now. You saw how to assemble one, how to put the studs on, and the car is getting really close to its maiden track run. But Not as bouncy as it was before, and I can still take some of those spacers out. And I'm going to do that right now. Definitely a lot nicer than those friction dampers, I'll tell you that. So, all right, guys, thanks for watching the video. I'll leave a link down below for the CVA Super Mini shock set. And I appreciate you watching the video. Give it a thumbs up, like, comment, subscribe, and we will see you on the next one.